I will not doubt or fear. My steps are ordered of the Lord. His guiding hand is near. He's here and there and everywhere. In all the ways I've trod, I've never passed beyond the sphere of the providence of God. No trial can my spirit break, for God will not forsake. He will with each temptation make a way for my escape. He's here and there and everywhere, in all the ways I've trod. I've never passed beyond the sphere of the providence of God. The future beckons and I bow. My God removes the care. Behold, He goes before me now, and will my way prepare. He's here and there and everywhere, in all the ways I've trod. I've never passed beyond the sphere of the providence of God. To Christ be loyal and be true. He needs brave volunteers to stand against the powers of sin, moved not by frowns or fears. To Christ the Lord be true, for He will bear with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true. To Christ be loyal and be true. In noble service prove your faith and your fidelity, the fervor of your love. To Christ the Lord be true, for He will bear with you and help you all your conflicts through. To Christ the Lord be true.
Hello. Good morning. I decided to mash those two songs together because two themes I hope you will see in the book of Ruth that we will study this morning. The loyalty is very clear in Ruth to Naomi, of course, and I think that is a foreshadowing, precursor example for our loyalty to Christ, and certainly we've seen His faithfulness demonstrated throughout the books we've studied so far, and of course His faithfulness in going to the cross for us, Christ. And then the providence of God, very, very clear in the book of Ruth, in a similar way to a book we'll study down the line. So anyway, those two things. So we'll watch the video here in a moment, and then we will probably dig into quite a bit more of the text because there's only 4 chapters. A little bit easier to do that than it is with Genesis. So when you're ready, sir.
The Book of Ruth. It's a brilliant work of theological art, and it invites us to reflect on the question of how God is involved in the day-to-day joys and hardships of our lives. There are 3 main characters in the book: Naomi, the widow, Ruth, the Moabite, and Boaz, the Israelite farmer. And their story is told in 4 chapters that are beautifully designed. Let's just dive in and see how this all unfolds. Chapter 1 opens with this line, "In the days when the judges ruled." And it reminds us of the very dark and difficult days from the book of Judges. And here we meet an Israelite family in Bethlehem, struggling to survive through a famine. And so in search of food, they move on to the land of Moab, Israel's ancient enemy. And there the father of the family dies, and the sons marry two Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. And then the sons, they die too. And so they leave only Naomi and these new daughters-in-law. And so Naomi, she has no reason to stay anymore. And so she tells her new daughters-in-law that she's moving back home. And Naomi, she knows that the life of an unmarried foreign widow in Israel is going to be very hard. And so she compels the women to stay behind. Orpah agrees, but Ruth does not. She shows remarkable loyalty to Naomi. And she says, wherever you go, I'm going to go. Your people will become my people, and your God will become my God. And so the two of them return to Israel together. And the chapter concludes with Naomi changing her name to Mara, which means bitter in Hebrew, and she laments her tragic fate. Chapter 2 begins with Naomi and Ruth discussing where they're going to find food. And it just so happens to be the beginning of the barley harvest. And so Ruth goes out to look for food, and it just so happens that she ends up picking grain in the field of a man named Boaz, who just so happens to be Naomi's relative. We're told that Boaz is a man of noble character, and he notices Ruth. And so after finding out more about her story, he shows remarkable generosity to her. He makes these special provisions so that the immigrant Ruth can gather grain in his field. And in doing so, Boaz is actually obeying an explicit command of the Torah to show generosity to the immigrant and the poor. Boaz is so impressed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi. He prays for her that God will reward her for her boldness. So Ruth comes home that day, and Naomi finds out that she met Boaz, and she is thrilled. She says Boaz is their family redeemer. Now, this family redeemer thing, this was a cultural practice in Israel where if a man in the family died and he left behind a wife or children or land, it was the family redeemer's responsibility to marry that widow, to take up the land and protect that family. So Naomi, she begins to hope that perhaps there might still be a future for her family. Chapter 3 begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan to get Boaz to notice their situation. So Ruth is going to stop wearing clothes of a grieving widow, and she's going to show signs that she's available to be married. And so Ruth goes to meet Boaz on the farm that night. And as she approaches, Boaz wakes up, and he's totally startled. And Ruth makes her intentions very clear. She asks if Boaz will redeem Naomi's family and marry her. Boaz is once again amazed by Ruth's loyalty to Naomi and her family, and he calls Ruth a woman of noble character. It's the same term used to describe the woman of Proverbs 31. So Boaz tells Ruth to wait until the next day, and he will redeem both Ruth and Naomi legally before the town elders. And so the chapter ends with Ruth returning to Naomi, and they marvel together at all of these recent events. In chapter 4, it all comes together. It turns out, at the last minute, Boaz discovers there is a family member who's closer to Naomi than he is, and he's actually eligible before him to redeem the family. But at the last second, this family member finds out that he's going to have to marry Ruth, the Moabite, and so he declines. But Boaz, remember, he knows Ruth's true character, and so he acquires the family property of Naomi, and he marries Ruth. And so just at the beginning, how Ruth was loyal to Naomi's family, so now Boaz is loyal to Naomi's family as well. The story concludes with a reversal of all of the tragedies from chapter 1. So the death of the husband and the sons is reversed as Ruth is married again and gives birth to a new son, granting joy to Naomi. And this symmetry between the opening and the closing, it's even more remarkable. So remember, the opening tragedy was followed by a great act of loyalty on the part of Ruth. And that is now matched by Boaz's act of loyalty that leads to the family's final restoration. And this symmetry, it highlights the design of the internal chapters as well. So each of the chapters begins with Naomi and Ruth making a plan for their future. And that's followed by a providential meeting between Ruth and Boaz. And each chapter concludes with Naomi and Ruth rejoicing at what's taken place. This story is beautifully designed, and that design actually connects with a really interesting feature of the story, and that's how little God is mentioned. Right? The characters talk about God a few times, but the narrator actually never once mentions God doing anything directly in the story, and that's its brilliance. because God's providence is at work behind every scene of this story, weaving together the circumstances and choices of all these characters. So Naomi, her tragedy leads her to think that God is punishing her, but actually the whole story is about God's mission to restore her and her family. And he's doing so through Ruth, through her boldness and loyalty, which brings healing to Naomi's life, but not without Boaz, who's a no-nonsense farmer who's full of generosity and loyalty. And so God uses his integrity combined with Ruth's boldness to save Naomi and her family. And so this story brilliantly explores the interplay of God's purposes and will with human decision and will. God weaves together the faithful obedience of his people to bring about his redemptive purposes in the world. And that leads to the real end of the story. The book of Ruth concludes with a genealogy, showing how Boaz and Ruth's son, Oved, was the grandfather of King David, from whom came the lineage of the Messiah. And so all of a sudden, these seemingly mundane, ordinary events in this story are woven into God's grand story of redemption for the whole world. And so the book of Ruth invites us to consider how God might be at work in the very ordinary, mundane details of our lives as well. And that's what the book of Ruth is all about.
Okay. I know normally I kind of reserve a few minutes for reactions to the video. You're welcome to jump in and say something, but what I'd like to do is just start reading in chapter 1, and as we go along, I'm not going to read terribly fast. I'll pause, from time to time, and if you see something that you connect to the video in that section, or you see some of these themes played out in the text itself, the loyalty, the providence, the boldness of different characters, the generosity of different characters, some of those things, just pipe in, raise your hand or whatever you want to do to get my attention, and we'll comment on that. But I'd like to, kind of get with the text a little bit more since we've only got 4 chapters. So starting in chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, right? We saw that in the video. We're still in that time period where there's a whole lot of upheaval and that cycle of evil is going on. So this is in the days when the judges ruled, and part of the struggle that they're going through at this point is a famine in the land. And a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, so important city that, of course, comes into the line of Christ's story at some point. From Bethlehem, Judah. And they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left there with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. So it's no wonder that she comes up with the name change later. And when she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, so the famine reached into Israel, but at this point in time, somehow God helps them have what they need to battle the famine. Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. So going back to where there is food and provision, supposedly or hopefully. Verse 7, with her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud and said to her, we will go back with you to your people. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who can become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then give birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. woe is me is an attitude that I express on a fairly regular basis. I don't know that that's quite what is captured there. There's a theology that is part of Israel's journey so far, that if bad things are happening to you, it must be because God is against you. So she's expressing more than just, oh, I've had a tough life. It's part of the sort of flawed theology view of God that he's involved in this way. And it was not just in Israel, it's kind of pervasive in other nations who believe wholeheartedly that their gods, though they not be real, were either for them or against them based on the fortunes of their lives. And so that's part of where that's coming from. In verse 14, at this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. I don't know what the original word is. I didn't look it up, but at least in English, there's a clinging, there's a sticking to, maybe a loyalty expression. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. It's a poignant choice from the first two aspects, right? Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. So it's not just I'm going to journey with you wherever you go. It's not just that I'm going to dive into your culture and become a part of your culture. I'm actually going to adopt your religion, and you don't see that happen too often with folks, where there's a willingness to really before having fully, I'm not saying that Ruth wasn't already exposed to the Jewish religion. Obviously she was. She married into the family. But for her to, when she has a moment to take leave and go back to what is normal to her, she chooses to stick with Naomi's religion and Naomi's God. That's an even more powerful statement. So there's a couple of things there. Something about Naomi, something evangelistic, I guess, about Naomi, has demonstrated to Ruth that it's worth it for her to leave behind what she has in her Moabite life. Another layer to that may be that what was in her Moabite life, the religion that she had there, just wasn't cutting it. And she's found something that's a little bit more worthwhile to her, which of course is then fully demonstrated in the rest of the story. Verse 17, where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. So long-term commitment, the rest of my life. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. That moment of truth, like, oh, I realize I can't stop you. Maybe you've had battles like that before, that I'm going to do the good thing. No, I'm going to do the good thing. No, I'm going to do the good thing. Somebody has to do the good thing. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, can this be Naomi? Right, so she's been gone, who knows, maybe 15, 20 years, something like that. She comes back. There's people who remember her, but there's something different that they notice right away. And like they said in the video, maybe even her way of dressing would have indicated that she's now widowed and alone. So she says in verse 20, don't call me Naomi. She told them, call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Famine language, interestingly enough. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. Okay, so there's a little bit more of the tone of woe is me. But again, this is part of the theology. So Naomi returned from Moab, accompanied by Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. Okay, so a key time marker in their daily lives so that we can see how that is affected in the next chapter. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Any thoughts, comments so far? Mm.
I've heard it expressed lots of times by lots of people. Things are not going right, therefore God must become king or something.
Yeah.
So there is, this story is relevant to us. It would have been nice for the author, whoever wrote this down, to, at the end of it,
Editorialize.
into a potential transformation of Naomi's outlook on this.
Sure.
Maybe God was not punishing me.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe God was letting me all the way through this. It just took this working out of things. The great thing is, in the meantime, she remained faithful.
Yeah. Yeah.
With that view,
Even though she thinks woe is me, she's still going to stick with, which is actually expressed in the Psalms in a few different places. Yes, Joe?
I like the book of these showcases from God.
Mm-hmm.
The Bible is very amazing with what a lot of things seem like that, but a lot of times that's all they speak. And you see the underlying story of grief, sadness,
Mhm.
the stories of Job,
Yeah.
of Ruth, like Jesus weeping
Yeah.
before his crucifixion.
Sure.
It's important to remember those things of grief because in those things we also see how they recover.
Sure, sure. And the reality of humanity, the real emotions that we're dealing with, absolutely. A friend of mine wrote a book about Ruth, The Road to Bethlehem, as a dealing with grief kind of story. Michael Whitworth. So, you just thought I made that up. I see. Verse 2, chapter 2, verse 1. Naomi had, oh, I'm sorry, did you have a thought beyond?
Yes.
Okay.
I was going to say that Joseph, said to his brothers, revealed himself as being their brother. He said, "Don't worry about this. God meant it for good. You meant it for evil. God meant it for good." And I think about 17 years that he waited in Egypt, half the time in prison, half the time falsely accused, that he was unusual that he could see, or maybe he didn't see in the moment, God's hand in negative, odd things.
Yeah. I don't think he had the Naomi attitude, but he may not have known exactly what God was doing, but he's able to see something beyond what Naomi is able to see. Yeah. So that's true as well. Chapter 2, verse 1, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing. The other translations may have the noble character idea there, but he's well thought of in the community. Notice, I'm going to stop there, because notice that we talked a lot, especially in Judges and a little bit in Joshua and other places, about God using people of very clear evil character, negative characteristics, to still accomplish his purposes. But here we see at least two individuals, maybe three, of very good character across the board. Not perfect. We're not saying they're perfect, but they're good people that he enacts his purposes through as well. So maybe a better conduit most of the time for God to use. But anyway, and Ruth, the Moabitess, said to Naomi, this is verse 2, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." This was a common practice for the poor to be able to go through the fields and glean the leftovers. It was something that was provisionally put in place in the law, which is part of what makes Israel so unique as a nation amongst the other nations. There weren't really other nations that had that kind of provision in place, nor what we see later with the family redeemer, kinsman redeemer law, where they would take care of the widows in particular in that way. So pretty impressive. So she knows about this. It's been explained to her. Again, maybe one of those attractive characteristics that brought Ruth to this new place with Naomi. But Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you," they called back. Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, whose young woman is that?" The foreman replied, "She is the Moabitess who came back from Moab with Naomi." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I have been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and your mother in your homeland and came to live with the people you did not know before." Sometimes the gossip chain's a good thing, right? The word got around. "May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." I love that. You know, that's exactly how he's described in the Psalms and in a few places. Is, God is, has the wings of protection that he's able to put around them. And so she's come to take refuge, maybe unknowingly, with this different God. And so I go back to this notion. How often do you see people? I know you probably have people, you may be a person in this room who came to faith in Christ because you were connected to someone that you wanted to be connected to, and you did it more for them at first, to be connected to them. But then being connected to them, you were around God and his people and his word in a more intimate way, and then you started to see it for yourself, and then it became a faith of your own. Now, obviously that can happen with the parent-to-child relationship, but I've seen it happen with friends, I've seen it happen with spouses, all kinds of different relationships where another person, just because of their own character, attracted someone to themselves that then was attracted to God. Verse 13, "May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord," she said. "You have given me comfort and have spoken kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servant girls." So expressing respect back and forth here, appreciation. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, "Come over here, we have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Even if she gathers among the sheaves, don't embarrass her. Rather, pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her." So a little added incentive, or a little added bonus specifically for her. So all of this is subtext that we kind of pull out of this, right? It's never stated that Boaz has fallen in love with her. Maybe we blow that out of proportion a little bit sometimes, but there's something going on that we can see between the lines here, that he wants to do something good for her. Maybe this is just goodwill. Maybe this is just his generosity. Maybe this is just the way that he expresses his faith in God. But maybe it's something a little bit more than that. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening, verse 17 says. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. So an ephah apparently is more than what Naomi was expecting. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsman redeemers." Then Ruth the Moabitess said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with his girls, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." So not everybody expressed the same level of care and generosity as Boaz. So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So a period of time passes, maybe a few months. Okay, any thoughts on chapter 2 that came to mind? All right. Sure. Yeah, there's a sensitivity that he seems to possess that may not have been common. Nope, it's you.
And just the protection that he provided.
Yeah.
That's all I know what happened. Yes.
Yeah. protection, again, not common in the world in general at that time or now, but certainly, yeah.
I wonder how the word got back to him. You said that the gospel thing.
The grapevine.
Because it says something about the people that were delivering the message.
Yeah.
That he wasn't actually jealous of other servant girls or anything like that. It's like, hey, look, here's this woman. And it's like nobody was harming her before, or not harming her.
Yeah, right. So, his reputation probably affected the people that were around him. There's an environment that was already predisposed to take good care of her, and he just reinforced it when he got there. Yes, and so good news travels fast too. That's one of the things I appreciate about this is there's good things that were being expressed that travels fast. It's not just the negative things that you hear about people. The good things can travel fast as well, but we have to be more intentional about that. Chapter 3. One day Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose matchmaker, make me? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself, put on your best clothes, then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. The loyalty and the obedience there. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Now I'm going to get into the mindset of Ruth at this moment. Is she doing this because she's already attracted to him? We don't know. Is she doing this because she wants to take care of herself? Not likely. Is she, at the very least, doing this because she sees how that could lead to a better state of care for Naomi? I think that's probably a little bit more in line with what we've seen from Ruth so far, not that the other things aren't part of it. So when Boaz had finished eating, verse 7, and drinking, and was in good spirits, he went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile. Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet, and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer." It's, very literally, if you think about that, it's the wings image. Cover up, protect, take care of me and my family. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character." There's the phrase, right? So there's a parallel, there's a relationship there, that Boaz has a noble character, she has a noble character, expressed very beautifully in Proverbs 31. He says, "All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I." So not only is he of noble character, he's going to show that. "Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." So she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could recognize, and he said, "Don't let it be known that a woman came to the threshing floor." He also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." When she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went back to town. When Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" Then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, "He gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, 'Don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed.'" Then Naomi said, "Wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today." Naomi's confidence probably drives a little bit through chapter 3 for Ruth to make it to the ending point, because I think she's humble enough to not be sure that this is going to happen. Okay, that was the end of chapter 3. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so remind me of the rules. So if her
There's no rules.
next available brother,
Yeah, it's basically the next nearest relative. So, so if there's a brother available, it would have been a brother. But obviously in this situation, there's no brother. So they would have to go, to another cousin side of the family and get connected that way. So how close, we don't know. We just have no idea how close either Boaz or this other guy are, but somehow connected to Elimelech, it seems.
was there a way for God to protect the women when they were to make sure that they were always
Cared for. Yeah.
And there was something else pointed out in the video, and also to perpetuate the family line,
Sure.
to protect the whole family.
A note about that all things can be perverted, all things can be changed, all things can be, twisted into something they shouldn't be, and obviously that must have happened when we get down to the whole Matthew 19, people asking Jesus questions about, yeah, but if this woman's passed down 7 times through the line, whose wife is she in the resurrection? It's like, what in the world? How twisted and perverted can we get about this? So what I'm trying to demonstrate is that even the most beautifully intended law that God put in place, over the years, over time, can be twisted into something it should never have been. And man, if that's true with God's law, then it can certainly be true of our traditions and policies and things like that. We got to be really careful that we always come back and re-examine those things and make sure that the intention is still being carried out, the intention of care and protection. Yes.
It's interesting that in African culture, the same kind of thing is in place. However, I have a dear friend in Zimbabwe where the brothers misused
Yeah.
the family.
Yeah.
They did not carry, they did not look after her. And they didn't necessarily have marriage in mind, production of children, but they took away what her husband had built up and abandoned her. Fortunately, she had the skills to make a living, but back in this time, a woman didn't allow culturally to have that kind of freedom, jobs-wise.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if we can do chapter 4, and we'll finish things out. Meanwhile, Boaz went up to the town gate, and this is a place of gathering for, sort of a courtroom type situation. Decisions, policies made there, the leaders of the town. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, "Come over here, my friend, and sit down." So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, "Sit here." They did so. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, "Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me, so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line." Just, business. "I will redeem it," he said. Then Boaz said, "On the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property." Didn't know there were things attached. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, "Then I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it." Now, in earlier times in Israel, for the redemption and transfer of property to become final, one party took off his sandal and gave it to the other. This was the method of legalizing transactions in Israel, exactly like penning your signature, right? So the kinsman redeemer said to Boaz, "Buy it yourself." And he removed his sandal. Then Boaz announced to the elders and all the people, "Today you are witnesses that I have bought from Naomi all the property of Elimelech, Kilion, and Mahlon. I have also acquired Ruth the Moabitess, Mahlon's widow, as my wife in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property, so that his name will not disappear from among his family or from the town records. Today you are witnesses." So to Mr. Wheat's point earlier, there's more than just the protection, it's also this keeping the family line intact, which I know we have some of that in our culture, but it's sort of not as much today. No, go ahead.
Family line, it's the land.
Yeah, the land.
It's God's way of keeping the land in its proper designations, which clan, which tribe.
Yeah, which has happened just few hundred years earlier with the doling out of the land. Then the elders and all those at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. It's a compliment. May you have standing in Ephrathah and be famous in Bethlehem. Big town fame. Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her, and the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. The women said to Naomi, Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel, more than just Bethlehem. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age, for your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and who is better to you than 7 sons, big-time compliment, has given him birth. Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, Naomi has a son, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse and the father of David. This then is the family line of Perez. Perez was the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Solomon, Solomon the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. Read that pretty fast, didn't I? What else do you see? Because we've only got a few minutes, so I'll make sure I'm not talking the whole time. Yeah.
Because it's a similar situation. Her first husband
Died.
and it was supposed to pass with her son.
Mm-hmm. Judah. Refused. Yeah.
Held off because he was afraid that he would also die.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Tamar's fault.
Yeah, yeah. Tainted.
So they,
She had some shady. Yep. Yep.
He's going to a prostitute, was he?
yes, so they both did that thing, but her morality was based on trying further to his wife.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the main reasons for it. You don't have to be remarried as a woman, as a widow, to be taken care of. But you do have to be remarried as a woman.
Continue the line. Yeah.
I think that's the more important aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting connection to Tamar. Okay, anybody else? Yes, Nancy.
Love the part when Boaz says, I've heard of all the good you've done, and she falls down on her face. To me, that's like facing Jesus. He says, enter into the heavenly kingdom.
Well done, good and faithful servant. Sure,
Reminds me of that just a little bit.
sure. Yeah. Hopeful for that, right? Joe? Mm-hmm. The genealogy. Yeah. So it's tied together. And again, that's the Bible Project's purpose. And I hope you'll be able to continue to see those kinds of things because we're doing the broad view. Yeah, very good. Okay. Yeah, and I just love what they say at the end of the video as well. This is just sort of the mundanity of life for these people, and yet God is involved in it. God is providentially putting things together so that the correct family line is continued. The genealogy does lead to Jesus, does lead to the Messiah. But I will caution us not to overfixate on that, because then, like in our culture, like I said earlier, we become so obsessed with, for instance, I don't have a son to continue my family name. Does that bother me? No. Guess what? The name of Christ is what needs to be continued in our families, right? That family name we all share. So that's an important lesson for us as well.
I didn't know Abraham was the ancient name for Bethlehem.
Right.
And it means
Fruitful,
fruitful.
yeah. That's cool.
That's the beauty of studying the Old Testament more. It helps us to
Okay. Well, we'll close this up then and step into some more history of Israel with Samuel and Kings and Chronicles over the next few weeks. There's at least one of those that summarizes the two books in one video, I believe. then I think the others, it's individual videos for the first and the second. So we'll see how that goes. All right, let's pray. Lord, we thank you so much for the blessing of being able to read together the book of Ruth this morning in more detail, and to see the themes continued, Father, to see your loyalty to your people, and your loyalty to those who pledge faithfulness and loyalty to you, Father. Even if that comes first through another person, the growth that is connected to you is seen in the story of Ruth. Father, thank you for this story. We pray, Lord, that we will stay connected to you in every aspect of our lives, that we will maintain our loyalty, and that we will bless others by doing so. Thank you for Jesus and his love for us and his call to be more like him. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.